The silence in the coffee shop broke like glass when Emma's voice cut through the morning chatter. "Wait. I know you. You're Dr. Rachel Chen, aren't you? From Psychology Today?" My sister Maya nearly choked on her latte, her eyes darting between her college friend and me like she was watching a tennis match she didn't understand the rules to. The magazine Emma pulled from her purse had my headshot on page 43, right next to an article about trauma-informed therapy that had taken me 3 months to write. Maya's face went white as printer paper. In that moment, watching my sister realize that the family embarrassment she'd spent years apologizing for had somehow become someone worth recognizing, I felt the ground shift under everything we thought we knew about each other. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. To understand why that recognition hit like a freight train, I need to take you back to where it all started. Back to the kitchen table arguments that lasted past midnight, back to the eye rolls and the heavy sighs, back to the day I first mentioned wanting to be a therapist, and watched my father's face crumple like I'd just told him I planned to become a professional fortune teller. The Chen household in Millbrook, Connecticut ran on 3 principles: work hard, stay practical, and never trust anyone who claimed they could fix people with just talking. My father, David Chen, owned a small accounting firm that specialized in tax preparation for local businesses. Numbers made sense to him. Ledgers balanced or they didn't. Problems had solutions you could calculate, not feelings you had to navigate through like some emotional minefield. My mother, Linda, worked as a nurse at Hartford Hospital, 12-hour shifts that left her feet aching and her patients thin. She dealt with real problems, she'd remind us. Life and death situations where a mistake meant someone didn't go home to their family. Both of them had immigrated from Taiwan in their 20s, building something from nothing with the kind of determination that brooked no argument with frivolous career choices. Maya, my younger sister by 3 years, absorbed their pragmatism like a sponge soaks up water. She majored in computer science at UConn, landed internships that led to job offers before she graduated, and spoke fluent code in languages that made our parents beam with pride. She was the family success story, the one who proved their sacrifices had been worth it. I was the question mark that kept them up at night. The psychology books started appearing in my room when I was 15, hidden between chemistry textbooks and calculus workbooks like contraband. I discovered them in the public library, drawn first to the covers, then to the words inside that seemed to explain things I'd noticed but couldn't name. Why Mrs. Patterson next door always closed her curtains when her husband's truck pulled into the driveway. Why my friend Jessica flinched when anyone raised their voice, even in excitement. Why I felt most comfortable in conversations that dug beneath the surface of things. I remember the afternoon I checked out The Body Keeps the Score from the Millbrook Public Library. The librarian, Mrs. Rodriguez, smiled as she stamped the due date. "Heavy reading for someone your age," she said, but not dismissively, more like she recognized something in the way I held the book, protective and eager at the same time. That night at dinner, I made the mistake of bringing it to the table. The cover was face down, but somehow my father's eyes found it anyway. He had a way of noticing things that didn't belong, like his accountant brain constantly auditing our family for inconsistencies. "What's that you're reading, Rachel?" His voice carried that tone I knew well, the one that meant he was already preparing his counterargument. I turned the book over, watching his expression shift as he read the title. "It's about trauma and how it affects the body. It's actually really fascinating how trauma." He set down his chopsticks with the precision of a judge using a gavel. "Everyone has trauma now. You know what we called trauma when I was young? Life. You dealt with it and moved on." My mother nodded, cutting her vegetables into smaller pieces than necessary. "Rachel, you're too young to be filling your head with other people's problems. Focus on your own studies." "But this is studying," I protested. "Psychology is a real field. People need help processing difficult experiences." Maya looked up from her phone long enough to roll her eyes. "Here we go again with the feelings doctor thing." The dismissal stung because it came so easily, like they'd all rehearsed their parts in this play where I was the naive idealist, and they were the voices of reason. But something in me dug in deeper, the way roots grow stronger when the wind tries to uproot them. Junior year of high school, I signed up for AP Psychology against my parents' wishes. They wanted me taking another science or math class, something that would look good on applications for pre-med programs. The compromise was that I had to maintain my straight A's in everything else. Mrs. Brennan taught AP Psych with the kind of passion that made you lean forward in your seat. She'd worked as a school counselor for 15 years before transitioning to teaching, and she had stories that illustrated every concept in our textbook with real human faces. When we studied cognitive behavioral therapy, she shared how it had helped a student overcome panic attacks that were keeping him from attending classes. When we learned about attachment theory, she explained how understanding her own attachment style had transformed her relationships. Psychology isn't just about fixing broken people, she told us one Tuesday afternoon, addressing the class but somehow speaking directly to me. It's about understanding how we all navigate this complicated business of being human. I started staying after class to ask questions that went beyond our assignments. What was graduate school like? How did you know you wanted to specialize in adolescent counseling? Did people really change, or did they just learn to manage their problems better? Mrs. Brennan never made my curiosity feel foolish. She lent me books that weren't on any syllabus, research studies, and case histories that showed psychology as both art and science. She introduced me to concepts that felt like keys to locked doors I'd been searching for: defense mechanisms, family systems theory, the neurobiology of trauma. At home, these conversations became arguments that followed a predictable script. I'd share something I'd learned about the therapeutic process, and my father would counter with statistics about therapists who caused more harm than good. I'd mention research on the effectiveness of talk therapy, and my mother would remind me about her patients who needed real medical intervention, not someone to listen to their feelings. You want to waste 4 years of college and then more years in graduate school so you can sit in a room and nod while people complain about their problems? My father's voice carried the weight of disappointment and disbelief in equal measure. We didn't come to this country so our daughter could become a professional listener. The phrase professional listener became his favorite way to describe what he saw as my misguided career aspirations. It was meant to diminish, to reduce everything I was passionate about to something trivial and unnecessary. But gradually I began to wear it as a badge of honor. Professional listener. Someone who made listening a craft worth perfecting. Maya's friends would come over sometimes, especially during high school, and I started noticing patterns in their conversations that went beyond typical teenage drama. Sarah, who always wore long sleeves even in summer heat. Michael, who made jokes about everything because serious moments seemed to make him physically uncomfortable. Jessica, whose mood would shift dramatically depending on whether her parents were.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
Getting along that week, I didn't say anything to them directly, but I found myself asking questions that opened up space for them to talk about whatever was really going on. Not probing or analyzing, just creating room for truth to breathe if it wanted to. One evening, Maya found me reading in the living room and plopped down on the opposite end of the couch. "Sarah asked me something weird today," she said, picking at the frayed edge of a throw pillow. "Yeah?" "She wanted to know if you were studying to be a counselor or something. She said talking to you made her feel better about some stuff with her mom." Maya's tone was carefully neutral, but I caught something underneath it. Not quite approval, but maybe the absence of dismissal. "I just listened," I said. "I know. That's what's weird about it." Senior year brought college application season, and the inevitable conversations about my major. My parents pushed for business, pre-med, or engineering. Practical fields with clear career trajectories and reliable incomes. I applied to their preferred programs at state schools, but I also secretly submitted applications to universities with strong psychology departments. The night my acceptance letter arrived from Wesleyan University with a merit scholarship for their psychology program, I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes before going inside. The letter felt like proof of something I'd been trying to articulate for years, but I knew it would be seen as evidence of my continued impracticality. The dinner table conversation that followed was everything I'd expected and dreaded. My father calculated the cost difference between Wesleyan and the state school that had accepted me for their business program. My mother worried about job prospects and whether I'd be able to support myself. Maya, who was a sophomore in high school by then, mostly stayed quiet. But I caught her watching me with something that might have been curiosity. "Rachel, I need you to think about this realistically," my father said, his voice taking on the patient tone he used with clients who wanted to claim questionable deductions. "How many therapists do you know who are financially stable, who don't struggle to find clients? This isn't a reliable career path." "But it's what I'm passionate about," I said, the words sounding insufficient even as I spoke them. "Passion doesn't pay bills," my mother added, not unkindly, but with the matter-of-factness of someone who'd seen too many people learn that lesson the hard way. The compromise we reached felt like a small victory that cost more than I wanted to pay. I could major in psychology at Wesleyan, but I had to double major in something practical. I chose business administration, telling myself it would help me understand the financial side of running a private practice someday. College opened up a world where psychology wasn't just accepted but celebrated as essential to understanding human behavior. My professors didn't just teach theories, they lived them. Dr. Martinez, who taught abnormal psychology, had spent years working in community mental health centers before transitioning to academia. She spoke about her clients with a respect and genuine care that made my chest tight with recognition. "Mental health treatment isn't about fixing people," she told us during our first class. "It's about helping them access their own capacity for healing and growth. The therapeutic relationship is the container in which that work happens." I threw myself into my studies with the kind of intensity that worried my roommate and impressed my professors. I read beyond the assignments, attended every guest lecture, and volunteered at the campus counseling center doing intake interviews and crisis hotline shifts. The work felt like coming home to a part of myself I'd been protecting from my family's skepticism. During winter break of my sophomore year, I tried to share some of what I was learning with my parents. I'd been studying family systems theory and recognized patterns in our own dynamics that felt both illuminating and painful to examine. "Did you know that children in families often take on specific roles that help the system maintain stability?" I said one evening as we were cleaning up after dinner. "Like, one child might become the achiever, another might be the peacekeeper, and another might be the problem that everyone focuses on." My father dried his hands on the dish towel with deliberate precision. "Rachel, we're not lab rats in one of your psychology experiments. Sometimes families just have different personalities." "I'm not analyzing us," I protested, though of course I was. "I'm just sharing something interesting I learned." "Interesting to who?" Maya asked, loading plates into the dishwasher with more force than necessary. "Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're saying there's something wrong with our family that needs to be diagnosed." The conversation shut down after that, but I could feel the tension lingering in the space between us for days afterward. I'd crossed some invisible line by suggesting that our family patterns might be worth examining, that psychology might have something to offer even to people who weren't obviously struggling. Junior year, I took a class on trauma-informed care that changed everything. The professor, Dr. Kim, was a practicing clinician who brought real case studies into our discussions. She taught us about adverse childhood experiences, intergenerational trauma, and the ways that unprocessed pain could echo through families for generations. I started seeing my parents' skepticism about therapy through a different lens. My father's parents had survived the Cultural Revolution in China, experiences he rarely talked about but that cast shadows I was only beginning to recognize. My mother had grown up in a family where emotional expression was seen as weakness, where dealing with problems meant working harder and talking less. Their dismissal of therapy wasn't just about practicality. It was about survival strategies that had served them well in circumstances where professional help wasn't available or trustworthy. Understanding this didn't make their skepticism hurt less, but it helped me see it as something more complex than simple stubbornness. I spent that summer interning at a community mental health center in Hartford, 40 minutes from home. The work was challenging in ways that textbooks couldn't prepare you for. Real people, with real problems that couldn't be solved with theoretical frameworks and case study analyses. Maria, a single mother dealing with depression and anxiety, taught me that listening sometimes meant sitting with silence while someone gathered the courage to speak their truth. James, a veteran struggling with PTSD, showed me how trauma could make the body remember things the mind tried to forget. Dr. Patterson, my supervisor, helped me understand that the work wasn't about having all the answers, but about creating space for people to find their own. "You have good instincts," she told me during one of our weekly supervision meetings. "You know how to be present with people without trying to rush them toward solutions. That's rarer than you might think." When I came home each evening, I felt full in a way that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with purpose. But when my family asked about my day, I found myself editing out most of what made the work meaningful. They wanted to hear about administrative tasks and paperwork, concrete evidence that I was developing practical skills. The parts of my job that felt most important, the moments of connection and breakthrough, didn't translate into dinner table conversation. One evening in July, Maya found me on the back porch reading case notes for my internship. She sat down beside me without saying anything, which was unusual enough to make me look up. "Can I ask you something?" she said, picking at the peeling paint on the porch railing. "Sure. Do you really think talking to someone can help with serious problems? Like, actually help, not just make people feel better temporarily?" The question caught me off guard. Maya rarely asked about my work, and when she did, it was usually with the same skeptical tone our parents used. "Yeah, I do," I said carefully. "But it's not magic. It's more like physical therapy for emotional injuries. It takes time and effort, and it doesn't work for everyone. But when it does work, the changes can be really profound." She nodded slowly. "My friend Ashley has been seeing someone at the counseling center at school. She said it's been helping her deal with her parents' divorce." Maya paused, then added quietly, "I always thought therapy was just paying someone to listen to you complain." "That's what a lot of people think," I said. "But good therapy is more like paying someone to help you understand patterns in your thinking and behavior that might be holding you back, and then figure out how to change those patterns." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching fireflies blink in the dusk. It was the longest conversation Maya and I had ever had about my career choice without it turning into an argument or ending in eye rolls. Senior year brought applications for graduate programs and the stress of proving that I was serious about making psychology a career. The programs I wanted to attend were competitive, requiring not just good grades but research experience, clinical hours, and recommendation letters from professors who knew my work intimately. I spent most of that year writing my senior thesis on the effectiveness of narrative therapy with adolescents, a project that required me to review hundreds of research studies and conduct my own small-scale analysis. The work was intense and solitary, but it felt like building something solid beneath my feet. My parents attended my thesis defense, sitting in the back of the room while I presented my research to a panel of psychology professors. I watched my father's face as I discussed methodology and statistical significance, saw his expression shift from polite attention to what might have been surprise. When one of the professors asked a technical question about my data analysis, I answered with the kind of precision he valued in his own work. After the defense, as we walked to the car, my mother said, "That was very professional, Rachel. Very thorough." It wasn't enthusiasm, but it wasn't dismissal either. Small progress felt like a victory worth celebrating. Graduate school acceptance letters arrived in March, and the one from the University of Vermont's clinical psychology doctoral program came with a full assistantship that would cover tuition and provide a small stipend. The program was exactly what I'd been hoping for, with opportunities to specialize in trauma therapy and work in their training clinic. The dinner table conversation that night was different from the ones we'd had about my undergraduate choices. My parents asked practical questions about the assistantship, the length of the program, and what kind of jobs would be available when I graduated. My father even looked up the university's ranking in psychology programs, nodding with what looked like approval when he found it listed among the top 20. 5 years is a long time, my mother said, but her tone suggested she was thinking it through rather than dismissing it outright. "And you'll be able to support yourself during that time?" my father asked. "The assistantship covers tuition and gives me about $15,000 a year. Plus, I can do some research and clinical work for additional income, I explained. It's not luxurious, but it's doable. Maya looked up from her laptop where she'd been pretending to study. 15,000? That's like poverty level. It's temporary, I said, and I'll be learning while I'm earning. By the time I graduate, I'll have 5 years of supervised clinical experience. My father drummed his fingers on the table, the way he did when he was calculating something complex. Finally, he said, "If this is what you're determined to do, then you should do it right. Don't go into debt for school if you can avoid it." It wasn't a blessing, but it wasn't a battle either. For the first time, we were talking about my career choice as a practical reality rather than an impractical dream. Vermont felt like stepping into a different world where psychology wasn't just accepted but essential to understanding everything from public policy to personal relationships. My classmates came from diverse backgrounds, but we shared a common belief that mental health treatment could make real differences in people's lives. The coursework was intense, beyond anything I'd experienced in undergraduate school. Statistics and research methodology, theories of psychopathology, developmental psychology, and clinical assessment. But alongside the academic work came practical training in the university's psychology clinic, where graduate students provided therapy under careful supervision. My first client was a college sophomore named Alex, who was struggling with social anxiety. Our sessions took place in a small office with 2 chairs, a side table with a box of tissues, and a window that looked out onto the campus quad. For 50 minutes each week, we sat together and talked about fear, avoidance, and the ways that anxiety had shaped his life since middle school. The work was harder than I'd expected, and more rewarding than I dared to hope. Alex gradually became more comfortable in social situations, not because I'd fixed something broken in him, but because our conversations had helped him understand the patterns that kept him isolated and given him tools to respond differently. Dr. Rebecca Morgan, my supervisor, watched video recordings of my sessions and helped me understand the subtle dynamics that shaped therapeutic relationships. "You're naturally empathic," she told me after reviewing one particularly difficult session where Alex had been describing his fear of judgment. "But empathy alone isn't enough. You need to learn how to use your responses strategically to help clients explore their experiences more deeply." I threw myself into learning that balance between genuine care and clinical skill. I read research studies on therapeutic techniques, attended workshops on evidence-based practices, and spent hours discussing cases with fellow students in our supervision groups. By my 3rd year, I was seeing clients with more complex presentations. Sandra, a middle-aged woman dealing with the aftermath of emotional abuse. David, a teenager whose parents were divorcing. Patricia, an elderly client working through grief after losing her husband of 40 years. Each person taught me something different about resilience, about the capacity for healing that exists even in the most painful circumstances. Sandra helped me understand how trauma could make someone doubt their own perceptions. David showed me how adolescents could carry adult burdens while still needing space to be kids. Patricia demonstrated that grief wasn't something to get over, but something to carry with grace. My dissertation research focused on trauma-informed approaches to family therapy, specifically looking at how addressing intergenerational patterns of coping could improve outcomes for adolescent clients. The work required me to review literature spanning decades, conduct interviews with practicing clinicians, and analyze data from family therapy sessions. The research felt deeply personal in ways that were both helpful and challenging. As I studied how families pass down both resilience and wounds from one generation to the next, I found myself thinking about my own family's patterns with new understanding. My parents' skepticism about therapy wasn't just cultural or practical. It reflected their own family experiences with mental health struggles that had been stigmatized and hidden. My father's parents had lived through political upheaval that made trusting outsiders with family problems feel dangerous. My mother's family had dealt with depression and anxiety by working harder and talking less, strategies that had helped them survive but left little room for emotional processing. Understanding these patterns didn't make my parents' dismissal of my career choice hurt less, but it helped me see their reactions as part of a larger story about survival and adaptation, rather than simply a rejection of my choices. I started calling home more regularly during graduate school, sharing updates about my research and clinical work. The conversations were still careful, with my parents asking practical questions and offering cautious support. But gradually, I noticed small shifts in their responses. When I told them about a paper I'd presented at a regional psychology conference, my father asked to read it. When I mentioned getting a small grant to support my dissertation research, my mother asked what the research would be used for. Maya, who was finishing her own degree in computer science by then, started asking more detailed questions about my work. "So you're actually doing research now, not just talking to people?" she asked during one phone call. "I'm doing both," I explained. "The research helps us understand what kinds of therapy work best for different problems, and the clinical work lets me apply that research with real clients." "That's actually pretty cool," she said, and I felt something shift in the space between us. The summer before my final year, I completed a pre-doctoral internship at a psychiatric hospital in Burlington. The work was intense, with clients who had severe mental illness, substance use disorders, and trauma histories that would have broken most people. But it was also where I learned that therapy could be effective even in the most challenging circumstances. Working with Dr. James Liu, a psychiatrist who had trained in both medical and psychological approaches to mental health, I learned to integrate different therapeutic modalities based on what each client needed. Some people responded well to cognitive behavioral techniques. Others needed more emotion-focused approaches. Still, others benefited from family therapy or group work. The key, Dr. Liu told me during one of our supervision meetings, is to match the intervention to the person, not the other way around. Good therapy is like good medicine. It's precise, it's evidence-based, and it's adapted to the individual patient. By the time I graduated with my doctorate, I had logged over 1,000 hours of direct client contact, completed a dissertation that contributed new knowledge to the field, and passed comprehensive exams that tested everything I'd learned over 5 years of intensive study. My parents came to my graduation ceremony, sitting in the auditorium as I walked across the stage to receive my diploma. When the presenter announced my name and added, "Dr. Rachel Chen," I saw my father's eyebrows lift slightly. Later, at the reception, he shook hands with my dissertation advisor and asked technical questions about my research with the same seriousness he brought to his accounting work. "Your daughter has exceptional clinical instincts," Dr. Morgan told my parents. "She's going to make a significant contribution to the field." My mother smiled politely and said thank you, but I caught her looking at me with something that might have been the beginning of pride. The job market for newly graduated psychologists was competitive, but I had strong references and a research background that set me apart from other candidates. After several interviews, I accepted a position at a community mental health center in Stamford, Connecticut, about an hour from where I'd grown up. The work was everything I'd trained for and more challenging than graduate school had prepared me to handle. My caseload included adolescents with severe trauma histories, adults dealing with chronic mental illness, and families navigating crisis situations that required immediate intervention. But it was also deeply meaningful work. I was helping people access their own capacity for healing, just as Dr. Martinez had described in that first abnormal psychology class years earlier. The theoretical frameworks I'd studied became practical tools for understanding and responding to human suffering. 6 months into the job, I received a call from a local journalist who was writing a story about innovative approaches to trauma therapy. She'd heard about a program I'd developed for adolescent clients that integrated traditional therapy with expressive arts techniques. The interview led to a small mention in the Hartford Courant, which led to an inquiry from Psychology Today about writing an article on trauma-informed care for their professional development section. The piece took me 3 months to write, going through multiple drafts as I tried to balance clinical accuracy with accessibility for readers who might not have extensive psychology training. When the article was published, I bought 3 copies of the magazine. One for my office, one for my apartment, and one that I intended to show my parents the next time I visited home. But weeks passed, and I couldn't find the right moment to bring it up. The recognition felt meaningful to me, but I wasn't sure they would understand why publication in Psychology Today mattered to someone in my field. Maya had graduated from UConn by then and was working for a software company in Hartford. We started meeting for coffee occasionally, usually at a place halfway between our respective jobs. These conversations were easier than they'd been when we were younger, less weighted with family expectations, and more focused on our actual experiences as adults navigating careers and relationships. It was during one of these coffee meetings that Emma recognized me, sitting at a corner table while Maya and I caught up on work and dating and the small details of our separate lives. I watched my sister's face as her friend held up the magazine, watched her process the fact that her sister was someone worth recognizing, someone whose professional opinion was valued enough to be published in a national magazine. The moment felt like the culmination of years of patient work to prove that psychology was a legitimate field, that therapy could make real differences in people's lives, that choosing to become a professional listener had been worth the skepticism, and the financial sacrifice, and the long years of training. But it also felt like the beginning of something new in my relationship with my family. For the first time, the work I'd been passionate about since high school wasn't something I had to defend or explain. It was simply what I did, as real and valuable as any other profession that required years of education and specialized training. Maya stared at the magazine for a long moment, then looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not quite admiration, but something close to respect. "I had no idea," she said quietly. "I mean, I knew you were working, but I didn't realize you were publishing articles and stuff." "There's a lot you don't know about what I do," I said, trying to keep my tone light. Emma, who had been watching this exchange with obvious confusion, looked between Maya and me. "Wait, you're sisters? And you didn't know she was published in Psychology Today? That's like a pretty big deal in the mental health world." Maya shook her head. "We don't really talk about work stuff much. I mean, I talk about coding, but Rachel's job always seemed kind of..." She trailed off, apparently realizing how that sentence was going to end. "Kind of what?" I asked, though I knew the answer. "I don't know. Less concrete, I guess. But this," she gestured at the magazine, "this is really impressive. Like, actually impressive." The validation felt simultaneously wonderful and painful. Wonderful because Maya was finally seeing my work as legitimate and valuable. Painful because it had taken publication in a national magazine for her to take my career seriously, when I'd been doing meaningful clinical work for years. But sitting there in that coffee shop, watching my sister read the article I'd written about helping adolescents process traumatic experiences, I felt something shift in our relationship. The defensive stance I'd maintained since high school began to relax. Maya was asking genuine questions about my work, wanting to understand rather than dismiss. "So when you're doing therapy," she said, looking up from the magazine, "you're actually using specific techniques that have been researched and proven effective?" "Of course," I said. "Everything I do is based on evidence and clinical training. It's not just talking, it's applied psychology." She nodded slowly. "I guess I always thought it was more like, I don't know, giving advice or something." Emma, who had been listening to this conversation with growing incredulity, shook her head. "Therapy is nothing like giving advice. Good therapists don't tell you what to do. They help you figure out what's going on in your own mind and what changes you want to make." Maya looked embarrassed. "I'm sorry, Rachel. I think I really misunderstood what you do." The apology was unexpected and more meaningful than she probably realized. For years, I'd been carrying the weight of my family's skepticism, trying to prove that my career choice was legitimate, while also trying to actually do the work I'd trained for. Maya's recognition felt like laying down a burden I'd grown so used to carrying that I'd forgotten how heavy it was. We stayed at the coffee shop for another hour, talking about my work in ways we never had before. Maya asked about my training, about the kinds of clients I worked with, about how I measured whether therapy was helping someone. Her questions were thoughtful and genuine, coming from a place of curiosity rather than judgment. When we finally got ready to leave, Emma asked if she could keep the magazine. "I might want to refer some people to your article," she said. "I work with a lot of college students who deal with trauma, and most of them don't know much about therapy or how to find good treatment." Driving home that evening, I thought about calling my parents to tell them about the encounter, but something held me back. The recognition felt fragile, too new to expose to their skepticism yet. I wanted to sit with it for a while, to let it become solid before testing it against their practical concerns and cultural reservations. Instead, I called Dr. Morgan, my former supervisor, who had become a mentor and friend over the years since graduation. I told her about the magazine, about Maya's reaction, about the strange feeling of being recognized for work I'd been doing quietly for years. Recognition from family can be the hardest to earn, and the most meaningful when it comes, she said. You've been building credibility one client at a time, one article at a time, one successful outcome at a time. That's how careers in this field are built. I keep thinking about all the times I had to defend my career choice, I said. All the arguments about practicality and job security and whether therapy actually helps people. And now I have evidence. Not just research evidence, but recognition from peers and publication and clients whose lives have actually changed. You always had that evidence, Dr. Morgan reminded me. What's changed is that other people are finally able to see it. That night, I sat in my apartment looking at the copy of Psychology Today with my article and my headshot. The recognition felt good, but what felt better was the knowledge that the work itself was solid, that I'd built something meaningful regardless of whether anyone else understood its value. The conversation with Maya had opened a door that had been closed for years. For the first time, I felt like I could share the parts of my work that mattered most, without having to translate them into language that made sense to people who didn't understand psychology. Maya was beginning to see that therapy wasn't just talking, but a skilled intervention that required years of training and ongoing supervision. Over the following weeks, Maya and I started texting more regularly. She'd send me articles about mental health that she found online, asking if they were accurate or what I thought about different approaches. I'd share updates about my work when something particularly meaningful happened, knowing now that she was genuinely interested rather than just being polite. The shift in our relationship felt like a preview of what might be possible with the rest of my family. If Maya could move from skepticism to curiosity, from dismissal to respect, maybe my parents could too. Not overnight, and not without continued patience on my part, but gradually, the way real change usually happens. 3 weeks later, Maya called me with news that would test everything. We'd built in our new understanding of each other's work. "Rachel," she said, her voice tight with worry, "I think I need help, professional help, and I don't know how to find someone good." The request hung between us for a moment, heavy with everything we'd never talked about. Maya, the family success story, the one who had it all figured out, was asking me for the kind of help she'd spent years dismissing as unnecessary. "Tell me what's going on," I said, settling into the voice I used with clients, calm and present and ready to listen. "I've been having panic attacks," she said quietly. "At work, at home, even just driving sometimes. And I keep thinking about Emma recognizing you, about how I didn't even know what you really did, and wondering what else I don't understand about myself or our family or anything." I felt my chest tighten with a combination of professional concern and sisterly love. Maya was describing symptoms that I'd worked with in dozens of clients, but hearing them from my own sister made them feel immediate and urgent in a way that clinical training couldn't buffer. "Panic attacks can be really scary," I said, "but they're also very treatable. I can help you find someone good to work with." "I was hoping," she said, then stopped. "I mean, could you see me as a client?" The question hit me like a physical force. Everything in my training said no. You don't provide therapy to family members. The boundaries are too complicated. The potential for harm too high. But everything in my heart wanted to say yes, to be the person who helped my sister the way I'd helped so many others. "Maya, I can't be your therapist," I said gently. "It wouldn't be ethical or effective. But I can help you find someone who's really good, and I can support you as your sister throughout the process." She was quiet for a long moment. "Is it because you don't think I'd be a good client?" "It's because I love you too much to be your therapist," I said. The therapeutic relationship works best when there isn't a pre-existing personal relationship that could complicate the work. That conversation with Maya marked the beginning of something I hadn't expected. Not just her journey into therapy, but my own reckoning with how the work I did professionally intersected with the family dynamics I'd been navigating my entire life. Within a week, I'd connected her with Dr. Sarah Goldstein, a colleague whose approach to anxiety disorders was both evidence-based and genuinely compassionate. Maya's first appointment was scheduled for the following Thursday. The night before Maya's session, she called me with the kind of nervous energy I recognized from my own clients who were about to start therapy for the first time. What if she thinks I'm overreacting? What if the panic attacks aren't actually that serious and I'm just being dramatic? These were questions I'd heard countless times in my practice, but hearing them from Maya made my chest tighten with protective instincts that had nothing to do with clinical training. Dr. Goldstein isn't going to judge whether your symptoms are serious enough, I told her. Her job is to help you understand what's happening and give you tools to manage it better. But what if I can't explain what's wrong? What if I get there and suddenly feel fine and can't remember why I thought I needed help? I found myself smiling despite Maya's obvious distress. That's probably the most normal thing anyone has ever said about starting therapy. Write down what you want to talk about before you go. Bring notes if you need to. You mean like homework? I mean like being prepared for something important. Maya was quiet for a moment. Rachel, can I ask you something that might sound stupid? Nothing you ask me about therapy is going to sound stupid. Do you think our family is part of why I'm having panic attacks? Like, is there something wrong with the way we relate to each other? The question hit me like a physical blow, not because it was unexpected, but because it was so perceptive. Maya was beginning to see patterns that I'd been studying academically for years, but had never applied directly to our own family system. I think every family has patterns that affect how individuals cope with stress, I said carefully. Part of what therapy can help with is understanding which patterns are helpful and which ones might be getting in your way. That's a very therapist answer, Maya said, but not dismissively. I guess what I'm really asking is whether mom and dad's way of dealing with problems might have taught us to ignore our feelings until they become panic attacks. The insight was so accurate it took my breath away. Maya had identified one of the core dynamics that had shaped both of our lives. The family belief that emotional distress was something to be managed privately and efficiently, not explored or processed with professional help. That's exactly the kind of thing that would be useful to talk about with Dr. Goldstein, I said. And Maya? That's not a stupid question. That's you being insightful about your own experience. After Maya started therapy, she'd call me occasionally to share general updates, careful not to breach the confidentiality of her sessions, but clearly needing to process the experience with someone who understood both the clinical and family context. She told me that Dr. Goldstein was helping her recognize the physical signs that preceded panic attacks, teaching her breathing techniques and cognitive strategies to interrupt the cycle of anxious thoughts. But more than that, Maya was beginning to understand how family messages about emotional expression had shaped her coping strategies. She was learning to identify feelings before they became overwhelming, to ask for support instead of trying to handle everything alone. It's weird, she told me during one phone call, realizing that the way I learned to handle stress actually makes stress worse. Like ignoring anxiety doesn't make it go away. It just makes it louder. That's a huge insight, I said, and meant it. What's it like to notice those patterns? Frustrating, she said immediately. Because now I can see all these times when I could have asked for help instead of just pushing through until I fell apart. But also kind of hopeful, like maybe I don't have to keep doing things the hard way. 6 weeks into Maya's therapy, she asked if I wanted to meet for coffee again. When I arrived at our usual spot, she was already there, reading what looked like a workbook on managing anxiety. The sight of my sister actively engaging with mental health resources felt surreal after years of her dismissing psychology as impractical. "How's it going with Dr. Goldstein?" I asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Good. Really good, actually." Maya closed the workbook and looked at me directly. "Rachel, I owe you an apology. A big one." The shift in her tone made me sit up straighter. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been going to therapy for 6 weeks now, and I'm starting to understand what you actually do for work. And I'm realizing that I've been really unfair to you for years." I felt my throat tighten unexpectedly. "Maya, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." Her voice was firm in a way I rarely heard from her. "I spent years rolling my eyes at your career choice, making jokes about feelings doctors, acting like what you did wasn't real work. And now I'm sitting in Dr. Goldstein's office every week, and I can see how much skill and training it takes to do what she does, what you do." The validation felt overwhelming in its sincerity. This wasn't just recognition from a colleague or publication in a professional journal. This was my sister understanding the value of my work because she was experiencing its benefits firsthand. "I always knew you were smart," Maya continued. But I didn't understand that therapy requires a specific kind of intelligence and training. Dr. Goldstein knows things about how minds work that I never even thought about. She can predict how I'm going to respond to things before I know it myself. That comes from years of training and supervised practice, I said, finding my voice. And honestly, from working with hundreds of people and learning to recognize patterns. That's what I mean, Maya said, leaning forward. You didn't just decide to become a femme therapist and start seeing clients. You went to graduate school for 5 years, you had supervision and training and research experience. You know what you're doing. The conversation felt like a door opening that I'd been pushing against for decades. Maya wasn't just acknowledging that therapy worked. She was understanding that providing effective therapy required expertise, that psychology was a legitimate field with rigorous training requirements and evidence-based practices. There's something else, Maya said, fidgeting with her coffee cup. Dr. Goldstein thinks it might be helpful for me to have a family session. Like, to talk about family patterns with mom and dad present. My chest tightened immediately. The idea of my parents sitting in a therapy session, being asked to examine family dynamics they'd spent years dismissing as unimportant, felt both necessary and terrifying. What do you think about that? I asked. I think it terrifies me, Maya said honestly. But I also think she's right. Some of my anxiety patterns are connected to family stuff, and those patterns affect everyone, not just me. Have you talked to mom and dad about it? Not yet. I was hoping you might help me figure out how to bring it up. The request felt loaded with complexity. On one hand, Maya was asking for my support as her sister. On the other hand, she was asking for my professional insight about how to approach family members who are resistant to therapy. The two roles felt tangled in ways that made me cautious. I can help you think through how to have that conversation, I said carefully, but I can't be involved in the family session itself, for the same reasons I couldn't be your individual therapist. Maya nodded. I know. Dr. Goldstein already explained that. But just having someone who understands both therapy and our family would be really helpful right now. We spent the next hour talking through strategies for approaching our parents about family therapy. Maya was particularly worried about Dad's reaction, given his long-standing skepticism about mental health treatment. What if I frame it as wanting to understand family communication patterns better? Maya suggested. Like, not saying there's something wrong with our family, but wanting to learn better ways to support each other. That's actually a really good approach, I said. It focuses on growth and learning rather than pathology or problems. See? This is why I need your help. You know how to talk about therapy in ways that don't make people defensive. That evening, Maya called our parents to ask if they'd be willing to attend a family session with her therapist. I wasn't there for the conversation, but Maya called me afterward to debrief. Dad's first response was to ask if this was something I really needed, or if the therapist was just trying to drum up more business, Maya reported. But when I explained that it would help me manage my anxiety better, he said he'd think about it. What about Mom? She asked a lot of practical questions. How long would it take? What would we talk about? Whether insurance would cover it. But she didn't say no. 3 days later, Maya called with an update. They said yes. We're all going to see Dr. Goldstein together next Tuesday. The news hit me with a complex mix of emotions. Pride that Maya had successfully advocated for what she needed, anxiety about how our parents would respond to being in a therapy setting, and a strange sense of vindication that my family was finally going to experience firsthand what professional mental health treatment looked like. How are you feeling about it? I asked. Nervous, Maya admitted, but also hopeful. Like maybe we can finally talk about things we've never been able to talk about before. The night before the family session, Maya called me one more time. I keep thinking about that day at the coffee shop when Emma recognized you from the magazine, she said. How I had no idea that you were published, that people in your field knew your work. What about it? I think that's when I started realizing I didn't understand what you did at all. Like I thought I knew, but I was completely wrong. Maya, you couldn't have known unless someone explained it to you. Our family never talked about psychology in ways that would help you understand what the field actually involves. But I should have asked better questions. I should have been curious instead of dismissive. The vulnerability in her voice made my chest tight. "You're asking good questions now," I said. "That's what matters." Maya was quiet for a moment. "Rachel, tomorrow when we're in family therapy, and Dr. Goldstein starts talking about family patterns and communication styles, I keep thinking that's going to be your world. Like, mom and dad are going to experience what you do for work every day. Different therapists work differently," I said. "But yeah, they'll get a sense of what professional therapy looks like. Do you think it will change how they see your career?" The question struck at something I'd been wondering but hadn't wanted to examine too closely. Would experiencing therapy as clients help my parents understand that what I did was skilled, professional work? Or would they focus on aspects of the process that confirmed their existing skepticism? "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I'm proud of you for advocating for what you need, regardless of how they respond to it." The day after the family session, I waited for Maya's call. When my phone finally rang, I could hear the exhaustion in her voice before she said a single word. "How did it go?" I asked. "It was intense," Maya said. "Really intense, but also really helpful." "Tell me what happened." Dr. Goldstein started by asking everyone to share what they hoped to get out of the session. Dad said he wanted to understand how to support me better. Mom said she wanted to know if there was anything the family could do differently to help with my anxiety. That sounds like a good beginning. It was. But then Dr. Goldstein started asking about family communication patterns, and things got complicated fast. Maya described how the therapist had asked about how emotions were typically handled in our family, how conflicts were resolved, and how family members showed care for each other. The questions had revealed patterns that everyone recognized, but no one had ever discussed explicitly. Dad got really quiet when Dr. Goldstein asked about how his own family handled stress when he was growing up, Maya said. Like you could see him thinking about his parents and how they dealt with the Cultural Revolution, but he didn't want to talk about it in front of everyone. That makes sense. Those are really personal and potentially traumatic experiences. But then Mom started talking about how her family believed that dwelling on problems made them worse, and how they thought professional help was for people who didn't have strong families. And Dr. Goldstein asked if those beliefs might be affecting how our family responds to mental health issues now. I felt my pulse quicken. The conversation Maya was describing touched directly on themes I'd been thinking about for years. How family beliefs about mental health treatment could become barriers to getting help when it was needed. How did they respond to that question? Mom got defensive at first. She said there wasn't anything wrong with believing families should take care of their own problems. But Dr. Goldstein didn't argue with her. She just asked what happened when family problems were bigger than what family members could handle alone. That's a good reframe. Yeah, and that's when Dad spoke up. He said that maybe some problems did require outside expertise, like when he refers clients to other accountants who specialize in areas he doesn't know well. The parallel made perfect sense, and I felt a flutter of hope that my father was beginning to see mental health treatment as professional consultation rather than personal failure. Then Dr. Goldstein asked about me specifically, Maya continued, about whether the family's approach to handling problems might be contributing to my anxiety. And Mom said something that really surprised me. What? She said that maybe they had been so focused on teaching us to be independent and self-reliant that they hadn't taught us how to ask for help when we needed it. The insight was profound, and hearing it from our mother made it even more significant. Maya was describing a family session where our parents were not only participating in therapy, but gaining genuine insight about family patterns that affected all of us. That's a huge realization, I said. How did everyone respond when she said that? Dad nodded and said he could see how that might make it harder for us to reach out when we were struggling. And then he looked at me and said he was proud of me for getting help instead of just trying to handle everything alone. I felt tears starting in the corners of my eyes. The conversation Maya was describing represented everything I'd hoped therapy could offer families. Insight, understanding, and new ways of relating to each other. There's one more thing, Maya said, and something in her tone suggested this was the part of the story she'd been building toward. What? At the end of the session, Dr. Goldstein asked if anyone had other thoughts or questions. and Dad asked her about your work. My heart stopped. What do you mean? He asked Dr. Goldstein what kind of training therapists needed, how long it took to become licensed, whether psychology was considered a medical field. She spent like 10 minutes explaining doctoral programs and supervised clinical hours and evidence-based practices. What did he say? He asked if she thought you were a good therapist. The question hung in the air between us. Maya was describing a moment where my father, sitting in a therapy session, had asked another professional for an assessment of my clinical competence. And what did she say? She said she couldn't comment on your specific clinical work since she'd never observed it, but that your academic background and training were excellent, and that the article you wrote for Psychology Today demonstrated a really sophisticated understanding of trauma-informed care. Dad asked about the article. He asked if writing for Psychology Today was a big deal in your field. Dr. Goldstein said it was definitely significant, that they only publish articles by clinicians and researchers who are recognized experts in their areas. I sat in my apartment, phone pressed to my ear, trying to process what Maya was telling me. My father, who had spent years dismissing my career as impractical, was sitting in a therapist's office, asking detailed questions about my professional qualifications and recognition in the field. How did he react when she explained all that? He got really quiet. Then he asked Mom if she knew you had published an article in a national magazine. What did Mom say? She said you had mentioned it, but that they didn't realize it was such a big deal. Maya paused, and I could hear her taking a deep breath before continuing. Rachel, I think they're starting to understand what you actually do for work. Like, really understand it for the first time. The recognition felt overwhelming and overdue in equal measure. After years of trying to explain my profession to family members who saw it as impractical at best, they were finally learning about it from another professional who could speak their language about credentials and expertise and recognition. There's something else, Maya said. On the way home, Mom asked if I thought you would be willing to recommend someone for Dad to talk to. What do you mean? I think the session brought up stuff for him about his parents and growing up during political upheaval in Taiwan. He didn't want to talk about it in family therapy, but Mom thinks he might benefit from individual sessions with someone who understands intergenerational trauma. The request felt like a complete reversal of everything my family had believed about mental health treatment. My father, who had spent decades dismissing therapy as unnecessary, was considering individual counseling for himself. What did you tell her? I told her to ask you directly. But Rachel, I think this whole experience has changed how they see therapy and how they see your work. After we hung up, I sat in my living room trying to process everything Maya had shared. The family session had apparently been more than just helpful for Maya's anxiety. It had given my parents their first direct experience with professional therapy. And that experience had challenged their assumptions about both mental health treatment and my career. 2 days later, my mother called me directly. She rarely initiated phone calls, usually preferring to catch up when I called home or during planned visits. Rachel, honey, she said after we'd exchanged basic pleasantries. Maya told me about your article in Psychology Today. I'm embarrassed that we didn't realize how significant that was when you first mentioned it. It's okay, Mom. There's no reason you would have known what Psychology Today represents in my field. But there is a reason, she said, her voice firmer than usual. We should have asked better questions. We should have been more interested in understanding your work instead of worrying about whether it was practical. The directness of her admission caught me off guard. This wasn't the careful, diplomatic language my mother usually used when approaching potentially sensitive topics. Dr. Goldstein explained to us about doctoral programs and clinical training, Mom continued. I had no idea that becoming a therapist required the same kind of education as becoming a doctor. It's a different kind of doctoral degree, but yes, it's 5 to 7 years of graduate training plus supervised clinical experience. And research? You do research too? My dissertation research was on trauma-informed family therapy. I still do some research projects, though most of my time now is spent in direct clinical work. My mother was quiet for a moment. Rachel, I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me. Of course. Have we hurt you over the years? With our comments about your career? Our skepticism about therapy? The question was so direct and vulnerable that I felt my chest tighten immediately. My mother rarely asked about emotional impact, preferring to focus on practical concerns and observable behaviors. It was difficult sometimes, I said carefully. I understood that your skepticism came from cultural and generational differences, but it was hard to feel like my work wasn't valued or respected. I'm sorry, she said simply. We were wrong. Not just wrong about therapy, but wrong about how we talked to you about your choices. The apology was more direct than anything I'd ever heard from either of my parents. For a family that typically addressed conflict indirectly, my mother's acknowledgement felt monumental. There's something else, Mom said. Your father is interested in talking to someone. About his parents, about some things from his childhood that he's never processed. Would you be able to recommend someone who has experience with immigrants and intergenerational trauma? The request represented such a complete shift from my father's previous stance on therapy that I had to ask for clarification. Dad specifically asked about therapy for himself? He didn't use the word therapy. He asked about talking to someone professional who might help him understand how his parents' experiences affected him. The distinction felt important. My father wasn't ready to embrace the language of mental health treatment, but he was open to the concept of professional consultation for personal insight. I can definitely provide some recommendations, I said. I know several therapists who specialize in working with immigrants and their families. Would you be willing to call him directly to discuss it? I think he'd appreciate talking to you as a professional, rather than just as his daughter. The request felt significant in ways that went beyond the practical. My mother was asking me to use my professional expertise to help my father, implicitly acknowledging that I possess specialized knowledge that could be valuable to our family. Of course I'll call him. That evening, I called my father for what felt like the first professional consultation I'd ever provided to a family member. The conversation was careful and formal at first, with both of us navigating unfamiliar territory. Your mother mentioned that you might have some recommendations for therapists who work with people from immigrant families, he said, his voice carrying the same tone he used for business calls. I do. There are several clinicians in the Hartford area who specialize in intergenerational trauma and cultural adaptation issues. What exactly would that involve? The therapy process, I mean. The question gave me an opening to explain therapy from a professional rather than personal perspective. I described how therapists who work with immigrants typically approach issues of cultural identity, family loyalty, and the impact of historical trauma on current relationships. It's not about pathologizing immigrant experiences, I explained. It's about understanding how cultural and historical factors shape individual and family coping strategies, and identifying which strategies are helpful and which might be creating unintended consequences. My father was quiet for a moment. The family session with Maya's therapist brought up things I haven't thought about in years, he said finally. Things about how my parents handled stress, how they taught me to handle problems. That's common in family therapy. Sometimes examining current family patterns illuminates historical patterns that have been passed down across generations. And that's something therapists are trained to help with? Therapists who specialize in intergenerational work, yes. They understand how historical experiences can affect family systems across multiple generations. We talked for another 20 minutes about what individual therapy might involve, how to choose a therapist, and what to expect from the process. The conversation felt surreal because we were discussing my area of expertise in ways that acknowledged my professional knowledge, rather than dismissing it. Rachel, my father said as we were preparing to end the call, I owe you an apology. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with years of unspoken tension. For what, Dad? For not taking your work seriously. For not understanding what you were trained to do. Dr. Goldstein made it clear that therapy requires significant expertise and training, and that you've achieved recognition in your field that I didn't even know about. I understand why it was hard to see therapy as legitimate professional work, I said. Your generation and cultural background didn't provide many examples of mental health treatment as medical care. That's not an excuse, he said firmly. I should have made more effort to understand what you were studying, what your work involved. I should have been proud instead of skeptical. The acknowledgement felt like a weight I'd been carrying for years suddenly being lifted from my shoulders. My father wasn't just apologizing for past dismissiveness. He was recognizing my professional competence and expressing regret for not seeing it sooner. I am proud now, he continued. Dr. Goldstein spoke about your work with real respect, and Maya showed me the Psychology Today article. I can see that you're helping people in ways that require real skill and knowledge. Thank you, Dad. That means more to me than you probably realize. I have one more question, he said. Professional question, not personal. Okay. If someone wanted to understand more about psychology and mental health treatment, not to become a therapist but just to be more informed, what would you recommend they read? The question surprised me with its genuine curiosity. My father was asking for educational resources about my field, approaching it as a subject worth learning about rather than dismissing. There are some good books written for general audiences that explain psychological concepts and therapeutic approaches. I said, I could put together a list of recommendations. I'd appreciate that. And Rachel? Yeah? I'm sorry it took so long for me to ask. The request represented everything I'd hoped for when I first became interested in psychology. The opportunity to help people who were struggling, with support from my family rather than skepticism. Of course I'd be willing to do that, I said. Rachel, do you realize what's happened here? 6 months ago, Dad was calling you a professional listener in a way that was meant to be dismissive. Now he's asking you to use your professional expertise to help his friends. The transformation felt miraculous and long overdue in equal measure. My family had moved from viewing therapy as unnecessary to recognizing it as valuable professional service. And they'd made that shift by experiencing therapy themselves, rather than just hearing me describe it. The television interview aired on a Thursday evening in March. I watched it at home, nervous about how I'd come across on camera but pleased with the substantive questions the reporter had asked about trauma-informed care and evidence-based practices. My phone started ringing within minutes of the broadcast ending. First Maya, then my mother, then my father, all calling to tell me how professional and knowledgeable I'd appeared on television. You sounded like the expert you are, my father said, his voice carrying pride in a way I'd rarely heard when he talked about my work. The reporter treated you like someone whose opinion mattered. My opinion does matter, I said, surprised by my own directness. In my field anyway. I know that now, he said. I should have known it sooner. The following Sunday, I drove to Millbrook for dinner with my family. When I walked into the house, I found the Psychology Today article, framed and hanging in the living room, right next to Maya's computer science degree and my parents' citizenship certificates. Mom, you framed the article? Your father insisted on it, she said, adjusting the frame slightly. He said it was professional recognition that deserved to be displayed. At dinner, the conversation focused on my work in ways that felt natural rather than forced. My parents asked thoughtful questions about the television interview, about my current clients, about research I was involved in. Maya shared updates from her own therapy and talked about how the family sessions had changed her understanding of our family dynamics. I keep thinking about that day when Emma recognized you from the magazine, Maya said as we were clearing the dinner dishes. How I had no idea that you were someone worth recognizing professionally. You know now, I said. I know now. But more than that, I understand why the work you do matters. Not just because it helps individual people, but because it helps families understand themselves better. After dinner, my father asked if I had a few minutes to talk privately. We sat on the back porch, the same space where we'd had so many arguments about my career choice over the years. I've been thinking a lot about something Dr. Wong and I discussed in therapy, he said, looking out at the yard rather than at me. What's that? About how parents sometimes dismiss their children's choices because those choices challenge the parents' understanding of the world. I felt my chest tighten with attention. My father was sharing insight from his own therapy in ways that applied directly to our relationship. She helped me understand that when I called therapy impractical, I wasn't really talking about your career prospects, he continued. I was talking about my own discomfort with the idea that emotional problems might require professional help. What do you mean? I mean that accepting therapy as legitimate meant accepting that my parents might have benefited from professional help, with the trauma they experienced during the Cultural Revolution, and accepting that I might have benefited from help processing my own childhood experiences. The vulnerability in his admission was unlike anything I'd ever heard from him. My father was describing how his skepticism about therapy had been rooted in his own resistance to examining painful family history. It was easier to dismiss therapy as nice. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment, feeling emotionally exhausted and oddly hopeful. The conversation represented a fundamental shift in how my father viewed both my career and mental health treatment in general. He was moving from skepticism to curiosity, from dismissal to respect. Over the following weeks, both of my parents began engaging with my work in ways they never had before. My mother asked detailed questions about my research when we talked on the phone. My father read the Psychology Today article and emailed me thoughtful questions about trauma-informed care approaches. Maya continued her individual therapy with Dr. Goldstein, and her anxiety symptoms gradually became more manageable as she learned to identify triggers and use coping strategies. But beyond the symptom improvement, Maya was developing insight about family patterns that affected all of us. "I'm starting to understand why you became a therapist," she told me during one of our coffee meetings. "Like, our family needed someone who could understand these patterns and help people navigate them differently." "What do you mean?" "I mean, you saw things about how families work that the rest of us didn't see. And instead of just being frustrated by it, you learned how to help people change those patterns." The insight was more perceptive than Maya probably realized. She was describing something I'd never articulated clearly: that my interest in psychology had grown partly from observing dynamics in my own family that seemed important, but were never discussed openly. Maybe that's part of what drew me to the field. I agreed. But I think I also genuinely enjoy the work of helping people understand themselves and their relationships better. "It's like you became fluent in a language the rest of us didn't even know we needed to learn," Maya said. "And now that we're learning it, we can see why it's so valuable." 3 months after the family session, my father began individual therapy with Dr. Patricia Wong, a therapist who specialized in working with Asian immigrants and their families. He didn't share details about his sessions, but my mother reported that he seemed more relaxed and reflective than she'd seen him in years. "He's been talking more about his parents," she told me during one phone call. "Not in the distant way he used to, but like he's trying to understand how their experiences affected him." The change in my father's willingness to examine emotional patterns felt like a vindication of everything I'd believed about the therapeutic process. He was experiencing firsthand that professional help could provide insight and tools for understanding complex family dynamics. 6 months after Maya's recognition of me in the coffee shop, I received a call from a local television station. They were producing a segment on innovative mental health treatments and wanted to interview me about the trauma-informed approaches I'd written about for Psychology Today. The interview was scheduled for the following week, and for the first time since beginning my career, I felt excited rather than anxious about public recognition of my work. I knew my family would finally see my professional expertise being acknowledged in ways they could understand and appreciate. The night before the television interview, Maya called with news that felt like the culmination of everything that had changed in our family over the past 6 months. "I told Mom and Dad about the interview," she said, "and Dad asked if he could record it to show his friends at the VFW. He? What? He wants to show your interview to his veteran friends. He said he's proud that his daughter is an expert in helping people deal with trauma." The reversal felt so complete that I had trouble processing it. My father, who had spent years dismissing my career as impractical, wanted to share my professional recognition with his social circle. He also asked if you'd be willing to talk to some of the veterans about therapy resources. Maya continued. "Apparently a lot of them struggle with PTSD but don't know how to find good treatment. Unnecessary then to consider that it might have helped our family deal with things we never talked about," he said. "That makes sense," I said quietly. "But it wasn't fair to you. You chose a career that required you to face difficult emotions and family patterns directly, and instead of admiring your courage, I criticized your choices." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing the weight of what he'd shared. "Dr. Wong helped me understand something else too," he said finally. "What?" "That you didn't become a therapist in spite of our family dynamics. You became a therapist because you understood those dynamics and wanted to help people navigate them differently." The insight was so accurate, it took my breath away. My father had articulated something about my career choice that I'd never expressed clearly even to myself. "Maybe that's true," I said. "I think it is true. And I think it makes you very good at your job." "What makes you think that?" "Because you understand what it's like to grow up in a family where emotional expression isn't encouraged, where asking for help feels like weakness, where cultural and generational differences create barriers to understanding." My father was describing the exact population I worked with most effectively: individuals and families navigating cultural adaptation, intergenerational trauma, and communication patterns that no longer served them well. "Your clients probably trust you because you understand their experiences from the inside," he said. "And you can help them make changes because you've made those changes yourself." The recognition felt profound in its accuracy and healing in its acknowledgement of my professional competence. "Dad, thank you for saying that." "I should have said it years ago." He finally looked at me directly. "Rachel, I'm proud of the work you do. I'm proud of the training you completed, the recognition you've earned, and the people you've helped. I know you are now. I want you to know that when people ask me about my daughters, I tell them that Maya is a software engineer and you're a psychologist who publishes in national magazines and appears on television as an expert in trauma treatment." The statement felt like a complete reversal of years of defending my career choice to family members who saw it as impractical. "That means everything to me," I said honestly. "It should have meant everything to me years ago." We sat on the porch until the sun set, talking about his therapy with Dr. Wong, about the changes he was noticing in his own emotional awareness, about his growing understanding of how family patterns influenced individual coping strategies. The conversation felt like the culmination of everything that had changed in our family since Maya's recognition of me in the coffee shop. Driving home that evening, I thought about the journey from that moment of surprise recognition to this evening of family acceptance and professional validation. The path had included Maya's panic attacks, family therapy, individual treatment for both Maya and my father, and gradual education about what professional psychology actually involved. But more than that, it had included my family's willingness to challenge their own assumptions about mental health treatment, to experience therapy firsthand, and to recognize the expertise that professional training represented. 2 years later, I stood at the podium of the Connecticut Psychological Association's annual conference, delivering a keynote address on intergenerational trauma in immigrant families. In the audience, sitting in the third row, were my parents and Maya, all of whom had taken time off work to attend. The recognition felt different from the magazine article or the television interview. This was my professional community acknowledging my expertise. And my family was there to witness it as supporters rather than skeptics. During my presentation, I shared case studies that illustrated how family therapy could help immigrants and their children navigate the complex intersection of cultural preservation and adaptation. I talked about the importance of understanding historical trauma, cultural stigma around mental health treatment, and the ways that family loyalty could both support and complicate individual healing. After the presentation, during the reception, my father approached the colleague I'd been talking with and introduced himself. "I'm Rachel's father," he said with obvious pride. "She's helped our entire family understand ourselves better, both professionally and personally." The colleague, Dr. Martinez from my graduate school days, smiled knowingly. "Rachel has always had exceptional insight into family systems," she said. "It's clear she learned about family dynamics from personal experience as well as academic training." Later, as we walked to the parking garage, Maya linked her arm through mine. "Do you remember that coffee shop conversation when Emma recognized you from Psychology Today?" she asked. "Of course. I keep thinking about how that one moment changed everything. Not just how I saw your work, but how our whole family understood what therapy could do." "It wasn't just one moment," I said. "It was your willingness to try therapy yourself, and Mom and Dad's willingness to participate in family sessions and individual treatment." "But it started with recognition," Maya said. "Someone outside our family seeing your work as valuable and important." My mother, walking beside us, spoke up. "Sometimes families are too close to see what's right in front of them," she said. "We needed someone else to show us what we were missing." My father nodded. Dr. Wong helped me understand that recognizing our children's accomplishments isn't just about being proud parents. It's about seeing them clearly as the adults they've become. The drive home felt like the completion of a circle that had begun years earlier with family arguments about career practicality and had evolved into genuine appreciation for professional expertise and personal growth. That evening, Maya called me after she'd gotten home from the conference. "Rachel, I need to tell you something I've never said before." "What's that?" "Thank you for not giving up on your career choice when we were all being skeptical and unsupportive. Thank you for becoming the therapist our family needed, even when we didn't know we needed one." The gratitude felt profound in its acknowledgement of the journey we'd all taken, from dismissal to recognition, from skepticism to support. "And thank you for being willing to get help when you needed it," I said. "Your courage to start therapy changed everything for our family." "It's weird how that works," Maya said. "I started therapy to deal with panic attacks, but it ended up helping all of us understand each other better." That's often how therapy works. Individual healing creates space for family healing. Is that something you learned in graduate school, or something you figured out from our family? "Both," I said honestly. "Academic training gave me the framework, but personal experience taught me how it actually works in real families." 3 months after the conference, I received an invitation to join the editorial board of the Journal of Multicultural Counseling and Development, a position that would involve reviewing research submissions and helping shape the direction of scholarship in my field. When I shared the news with my family, my father's response surprised me with its sophisticated understanding of what the invitation represented. "Editorial boards are invitation only, right?" he asked. "Based on professional reputation and expertise?" "Yes, they invite people who are recognized as experts in specific areas. So this is peer recognition of your knowledge and judgment in multicultural therapy approaches?" "Exactly." My father nodded with satisfaction. "That's significant professional recognition. You should be proud." The conversation felt like the culmination of everything that had changed in our family's understanding of psychology as a legitimate field requiring specialized expertise and ongoing professional development. A year later, Maya got, "Used to call you?" she asked. "A professional listener?" I remember. "He meant it as an insult then." "I know," Maya smiled, adjusting her daughter on her lap. "But that's exactly what you are. You're a professional listener. And it turns out that's exactly what the world needs." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Fu engaged to a software engineer she'd met through work. During the engagement party, she pulled me aside for a private conversation. "I have a favor to ask," she said. "David and I want to do a few sessions of premarital counseling before the wedding. Not because we're having problems, but because therapy helped me understand myself better. And I think it might help us understand our relationship better too." "That sounds like a great idea. Do you want me to recommend someone?" "Actually, we were hoping you might have some suggestions about what to look for in a couples therapist, and maybe some questions we should ask during the initial consultation." The request represented everything I'd hoped for when I first became interested in psychology. Family members seeking professional mental health services proactively, viewing therapy as a resource for growth rather than crisis intervention. "I'd be happy to help you think through what to look for," I said. "And Maya? I'm proud of you for approaching marriage with that kind of intentionality." "I learned it from watching you approach your career with intentionality," she said. "Even when the rest of us didn't understand why it mattered to you." At Maya's wedding 6 months later, she asked me to give a toast during the reception. Standing in front of extended family and friends, I talked about the importance of relationships that support individual growth while creating space for mutual understanding. Maya and David have chosen to build their marriage on a foundation of honest communication and professional guidance when they need it, I said. They understand that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness, and that good relationships require ongoing attention and care. After the toast, several family friends approached me to ask about therapy resources for themselves or their children. Word had spread through our extended community that I was a psychologist, and people were curious about mental health services in ways that felt respectful rather than skeptical. My uncle, who had always been dismissive of anything he considered quote, 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 Asked if I knew anyone who worked with veterans dealing with readjustment issues after deployment. My son came back from Afghanistan last year and he's struggling with some things, he said quietly. I used to think therapy was for people who couldn't handle their problems, but after seeing how it helped your family, I'm wondering if professional help might be good for him. I know several therapists who specialize in military trauma, I said. I'd be happy to give you some referrals. Would you be willing to talk to him directly? Not as his therapist, but just to explain what therapy involves and help him understand it's not admitting weakness. The request felt like validation of everything I'd learned about reducing stigma around mental health treatment, through education and personal example. Of course I'd be willing to talk with him. 5 years after Emma's recognition of me in the coffee shop, I opened my own private practice specializing in trauma-informed family therapy. The decision felt like the natural evolution of years of clinical experience, professional recognition, and growing confidence in my expertise. My family celebrated the opening with a dinner at their favorite restaurant, where my father presented me with a small gift, a brass nameplate from my office door that read, Dr. Rachel Chen, licensed psychologist. I wanted to give you something that acknowledged your professional achievement, he said. Something that showed how proud we are of what you've accomplished. The nameplate now sits on my desk, where I see it every day as I work with individuals and families navigating the complex intersection of cultural identity, family loyalty, and personal growth. Last month, Maya brought her 6-month-old daughter to visit my office. As we sat in my therapy room, Maya looked around at the diplomas on the walls, the professional books on the shelves, and the comfortable chairs where I spend my days listening to people's stories. Do you remember what Dad